the wedding I watched from my couch. I didn't even know my sister was getting married until my phone lit up with a notification that said, "Your friend is going live." Not my sister, not my mother, not any of the people whose last name I used to share like a home address. It was a second cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, the kind of person who only remembers you on your birthday because Facebook shoves your name in her face. I was sitting on my sagging gray couch in an oversized t-shirt and leggings with a bleach stain on one knee, trying to convince myself that reheated pasta counted as dinner. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind that feels like it's made for other people's happiness. Couples walking dogs, kids on scooters, brides in white. I almost ignored the notification. I almost set the phone face down on the coffee table and pretended I hadn't seen it. But there was that tiny thumbnail of a white dress and an arch of flowers, and underneath it, the name of the venue. I knew that name. I'd written it in my journal years ago, back when I believed my father would still be here to walk me down an aisle. My thumb tapped before my brain could talk me out of it. The live video opened on chaos, the pleasant kind. People talking over each other, laughter, the swish of fabrics, someone shouting, "Turn the phone sideways." The picture jerked, tilted, then stabilized. And there it was, the courtyard I had once called my dream place, with its brick walls and fairy lights and the old, twisting tree at the center. The tree I'd shown my mother in a brochure and said, "Can't you just see Dad standing right there, waiting to walk with me?" It took a second for my stomach to catch up to what my eyes were seeing. The fairy lights, the white chairs, the aisle runner with rose petals dusted down the center like someone had tried to make a straight line and gotten distracted. And then, my sister. My baby sister, in a fitted lace dress, laughing and pretending not to notice she was being filmed. I remember hearing my own breath before I realized I was holding it. That sharp, thin sound that feels like it belongs to somebody else. I wasn't invited. No missed calls. No, we need to talk. No explanation that things were complicated, that maybe it would be better if I didn't come. Just this, my sister's wedding day, brought to me not by family but by the algorithm. For a moment I told myself it had to be a pre-wedding party, an engagement thing, a bridal shower maybe, something small and casual, something you could accidentally forget to invite your oldest daughter to. "Look at the bride," someone cooed behind the phone. "She's so beautiful, your mom is going to cry." My mom. I leaned closer to the screen until the pixels started to break apart, until the video became tiny squares of color that barely held together. The camera swung wildly, catching guests one by one, smiling faces, familiar haircuts, uncles in poorly fitted suits. My Aunt Dolores waved at the phone. My cousin Andre did his usual two-finger peace sign, and then the camera landed near the front row. There she was. My mother sat on the aisle, wearing a champagne-colored dress that shimmered even through the low resolution, and the good earrings I'd bought her for her 60th birthday. Her hair was done the way she liked it for special occasions, soft curls around her face, a little extra volume at the crown. She was laughing at something the woman next to her said, her hand pressed delicately to her chest, the way she did when she wanted to look modest and important at the same time. She looked happy. Not worried, not sad, not like a woman whose eldest daughter was sitting alone on a thrift store couch, watching the moment she'd once promised would be for you first, because you gave up so much. The phone's microphone caught my mother's voice, thin but unmistakable. "She looks like a princess," she said. "My baby girl." My baby girl. Something in me cracked so quietly it was almost polite. I didn't cry right away. That's the part people don't tell you. Sometimes heartbreak doesn't come with dramatic sobbing and ruined mascara. Sometimes it feels like your whole body just empties out. Like someone opened a trapdoor at the bottom of your chest and everything warm and heavy that made you simply fell through. I sat there with the phone inches from my face, my mouth slightly open, my eyes dry, as the wedding I should have at least been invited to unfolded in shaky live video. The officiant appeared. The guests stood. The music, some generic romantic ballad, warbled through the speakers and my crappy phone. I watched my sister walk down the aisle on the arm of our Uncle Tony, because of course my father wasn't there. He'd been gone for 3 years. I wondered if anyone thought of me when they decided who would take his place. I wondered if my name had been said out loud at all. As the camera zoomed in and out, a thin thread of memory tugged at me. The last time I had spoken to my mother, 6 months earlier, we were standing in her kitchen. I'd said no to something she wanted. Money, of course, it was always money. And she'd looked at me with a tight, pitying smile and said, "You made your choice, now live with it." At the time, I'd told myself she was just angry. Parents say awful things when they're hurt. The words had stung, but I had filed them under things we'll fix later, after everyone calms down. Now, watching her beam at the altar like she had birthed only one daughter instead of two, I realized she had meant it literally. I had made my choice. I had chosen to stop being their wallet, their emergency fund, their always available, always agreeable eldest. And in return, they had chosen to pretend I didn't exist. "Say cheese," someone near the front whispered, and for a moment the bride and groom turned toward the camera. My sister's dress caught the light, scattering it like water. I noticed the bouquet, white roses, baby's breath, a few pale pink peonies. The kind of bouquet you have to special order and pay extra for. My eyes drifted to the Dacre, the custom sign with their names, the engraved champagne flutes, the live band in the background instead of a DJ. None of this came cheap. I knew because I used to be the one who calculated the cost of everything, down to the last napkin. A heavy, familiar shame slunk up my spine. I shouldn't be watching this, I thought. I shouldn't be sitting here, obsessing over people who didn't even think to text me. I should turn it off. I should delete the app. I should move on. Instead, I watched the entire ceremony. I watched them exchange vows. I watched my mother dab at the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief I didn't recognize. I watched the groom slip a ring onto my sister's finger, a thin band that flashed in a way that said diamond, not cubic zirconia. I watched them kiss, and the crowd howl. And confetti burst into the air like tiny pieces of someone else's future. Only when the live ended did the tears finally come. They came quietly, the way the first rain comes after a long, sticky summer. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth to keep the sound in, as if anyone could hear me in that tiny apartment. My chest hurt, a dull, deep ache, like grief layered on top of old grief. I cried for the little girl who used to braid her sister's hair before school, for the teenager who worked double shifts so her siblings could have new shoes, for the woman who held her father's hand while he took his last breath and promised him she would look after everyone. Mostly, I cried because it hit me, all at once, that my family had moved on without me, and they weren't looking back. After a while, the tears slowed, but I didn't move. I just sat there, phone still in my hand, screen gone dark, my reflection faint and warped. The room felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums. A notification pinged. New photos added to the album. Forever Begins Today ring. My cousin had posted an entire gallery now. Stiff-posed pictures, candid shots, the cake, the first dance, my mother with her arms wrapped around the happy couple like she was afraid someone might steal them if she let go. I opened the album, telling myself this was the last time. Just one more look, one more small act of self-harm before I went back to pretending I didn't care. That's when I noticed it. At first, it was just a vague sense of wrongness, a little itch at the back of my mind. Something in the background of one photo. A glint, a shape, a pattern. I scrolled back, squinted, zoomed in until the pixels broke apart again. No, that couldn't be right. I backed out and opened a different picture. Same feeling, same half-formed suspicion. My heart started to pound, not with hurt this time, but with a strange, electric kind of anger. Because suddenly, staring at those photos, I realized this wasn't just about not being invited. Something about that wedding didn't add up, and if I was right, they hadn't just cut me out of their lives. They'd used something that was supposed to be mine to pay for the celebration of my absence. People always assume the wedding was the first betrayal. It was. By the time my sister walked down that aisle without me, the ground under my feet had been eroding for years. The wedding was just the moment when all the cracks finally lined up and the floor gave way. If you really want to understand how I ended up on that gray couch, watching my own family celebrate like I was a stranger, you have to start with the night my father died. Or more specifically, the morning after. My mother sat at the kitchen table in her robe, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. Her eyes were swollen and dry, the way they get when you've cried everything out and there's nothing left. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink. The house smelled like flowers and hospital antiseptic and the faint, sour trace of fear. I'd spent the night on the living room floor, half awake, answering calls, returning texts, telling people what they were supposed to say to us. "I'm so sorry. He was such a good man. Let us know if you need anything." What I remember most about that morning isn't the grief. It's the silence that fell after my mother said, very softly, "What are we going to do now?" and looked directly at me instead of at my brother or my sister. I was 28. My brother was 23, halfway through a degree he kept switching. My sister was 19, still living at home, still changing her hair color every month to match whatever girl group she'd decided she belonged to. "We'll figure it out," I said, because that's what I always said, even when I had no idea what it was, let alone how to fix it. I reached across the table, covered my mother's hand with mine, and felt, for the first time, the weight she was quietly passing to me. Bills came in like waves. Funeral costs. The mortgage. The car payment. The credit card my father had used for emergencies that somehow always included birthdays, Christmas, and the random Tuesday he felt guilty for not being around. I picked up extra shifts at work, weekend overtime. I took on freelance projects at night, eyes burning at the laptop while everyone else slept. I canceled the trip I'd been planning for years, the one with the non-refundable deposit I'd scraped together by selling things I loved. I told myself it didn't matter. Family came first. Travel could wait. "You're my rock," my mother told me at the funeral, her fingers digging into my arm hard enough to leave small crescents. "I don't know what I'd do without you." People heard that and nodded in approval. "Isn't she lucky," they said, "to have such a responsible eldest daughter?" I wore the praise like a medal and a chain at the same time. At first, the requests were small. "Can you spot me for the electricity this month? I'll pay you back when your brother sends money." "Your sister's books were more expensive than we thought. Can you help?" "The insurance company is being difficult. Can you put this copy on your card and I'll give it right back?" Right back never came, but I believed it would. I told myself this was temporary. We were grieving. Things were tight. When my mother pressed her cheek to mine and whispered, "You're such a blessing," I felt proud, useful, needed. My brother joked once, during a family dinner, if we had to pick one of us to be the rich aunt, it'd be you. I laughed. I wasn't rich. I was just careful. I meal prepped. I skipped nights out. I stocked my pantry when things were on sale. I thought I was being smart. I didn't realize I was becoming infrastructure. The first time my mother asked me to co-sign a loan, she made it sound like nothing. "It's just for the small renovation," she said, sliding the papers across the table while the TV murmured in the background. "The bank says I need a stronger income on here. You know they loved your father, it's just he's gone." Her voice cracked on the last word, and guilt punched me in the chest. I read the papers, sort of. I saw the numbers, nodded, and asked a few questions because that's what responsible people did. Interest rate. Monthly payments. I took a pen from my purse and signed where the sticky flags told me to. "You always were the strong one," my mother said, kissing the top of my head. "Not like your brother," she added fondly. "He means well, but he's still a child." "And your sister," she shrugged. "She's sensitive. You're the only one I can really count on. If you repeat something often enough, it starts to sound like the truth." I learned to hear, "You're the strong one," as "you're the one who will fix this." I didn't see the trap, hidden inside the compliment. The first time I tried to say no came a year later, when my sister wanted to go away to school. Which is to say, she wanted to move to an apartment near campus with her friends and needed someone to cover the deposit, the first month, the last month, the furniture, the bus pass, and the gap between her scholarship and reality. "She's so excited," my mother said, eyes shining. "You know your father always wanted her to have a chance you never got." It was true. When I finished high school, college had been something vague and distant. There was never money. There were always more urgent fires. By the time I could have gone back, I was too busy working to keep us afloat. "I can't," I said slowly, tasting the unfamiliar shape of the word. "Mom, I'm already paying on the house loan. I barely have anything left after my own bills." She went very quiet, the way some people do right before a storm. "I didn't realize we were keeping score," she said after a moment. "You know she looks up to you. If you could have seen the way she cried when they offered her that spot." Guilt again. Always guilt. "I'm not keeping score," I said quickly. I'm tired. I need to think about my own future at some point." "Oh," my mother said, with a small, bitter smile. "Your future." "Right. Of course." That was the first time I walked away from her kitchen feeling like I'd done something wrong just by wanting a boundary. By the time I got home, I was already texting, "I'll help with what I can." What I could somehow turned into half the expenses. The pattern repeated. Surprise bills. Medical tests. Car repairs. The phone would ring at inconvenient times. "Hey baby, are you busy?" My mother rarely called just to talk anymore. There was always a reason. "You know family remembers who really shows up," she would murmur when I hesitated. "Your brother is still finding his path. Your sister is just starting out. You're the only one standing on solid ground." Solid ground felt more and more like a lie. My savings account shrank. I woke up at night, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if I lost my job? What if I got sick? What if, one day, I needed help and there was no one left to ask? Meanwhile, the way they spoke about me shifted. In public, I was still our rock, Miss Responsible, the one everyone bragged about. In private, I heard my sister sigh, "You know how she is," when I asked for a simple courtesy. I saw my brother roll his eyes when I suggested maybe he should pick up an extra shift instead of going on a weekend trip. The humiliations were small at first, easy to brush off. Once we were at a crowded restaurant, all squeezed into a booth. Me, my mother, my sister, her new boyfriend, and my brother. The waiter looked overwhelmed. When the boyfriend arrived late, my mother smiled at me and said, "Sweetheart, could you move? Let him sit next to her. You don't mind, do you?" I ended up at a tiny table by the kitchen, half a step away from the family, close enough to hear the conversation but not quite part of it. Another time, when I finally bought myself a decent coat after 3 winters of pretending I wasn't cold, my sister laughed. "Look at you, Miss Fancy. Did we finally let you spend some of your money on yourself?" The table chuckled. I forced a smile and made a joke. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I ran my fingers over the coat's seams, wondering if I should have kept the tags on and taken it back. Every time I tried to assert myself, the story shifted. If I asked my brother to repay even part of what I'd lent him, my mother would sigh. "He's trying, you know. It's hard for him. You sound just like those people who never helped us when we were struggling." If I hinted that my sister could maybe work part-time, my sister would storm out, and my mother would accuse me of being jealous. Jealous? As if I wanted more bills, more responsibility, more of the invisible work no one clapped for. As if I didn't lie awake some nights imagining a life where I was allowed to be the sensitive one, or the baby, instead of the bank. Still, I kept saying yes. Until the day I finally didn't. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my mother called about the new loan. Her voice was unusually bright, the way it got when she'd already made a decision and needed me to fall in line. "The bank said if we add your name, it'll go through no problem," she said. "It's just to consolidate some things. You know how these interest rates are. It'll actually save us money in the long run." I was at work, staring at my own stack of bills. I'd just gotten an email about a rent increase. My car needed new tires. My back hurt from stress I pretended was just bad posture. "Can you send me the details?" I asked. "I need to see everything before I decide." There was a pause. "Decide," she repeated, as if I'd used a word that didn't belong to me. "What is there to decide? You know we always pay. Have we ever not paid? You're making this complicated." Something inside me, some small, exhausted part, stood up. "I'm not co-signing anything else," I said. The words came out calm and clear, like they'd been rehearsed in a dream. "I can't keep taking on more debt, Mom. I have to think about my own life, my own future." On the other end of the line, the silence went cold. When she finally spoke, her voice was unfamiliar. Flat, sharp around the edges. "Wow," she said. "I see. So after everything we've done for you, this is where we are. After you lived in this house rent-free. After we fed you, clothed you, gave you everything, now suddenly you're too good for us." "That's not what I'm saying," I protested. "I've been helping for years. I'm drowning here. I just..." "Drowning," she snapped. You don't know what drowning is. Some of us don't have the luxury of boundaries and self-care. Some of us just do what needs to be done." I could feel my chest tightening, my vision blurring around the edges. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to drive over there and make her look at spreadsheets of all the transfers I'd made. But I just stood in the office stairwell, listening. "You've changed," she said finally, with icy disappointment. "Ever since your father died, you've become cold. Selfish. He would be ashamed to hear you talk like this." That one landed like a slap. "Don't bring Dad into this," I whispered. "He knows what I did for this family. You know it too." She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You always make yourself the hero," she said. "Well, I hope your precious future keeps you warm at night, because clearly you don't need a family." The call ended with a click. No goodbye. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear long after the line went dead, listening to the empty static as if I could still hear her breathing. That weekend, she invited my brother and sister over for dinner. She didn't invite me, but my brother texted, "You should come. Mom wants to talk." I went. Of course I went. Part of me still believed we could fix it if we just sat down like grown adults and talked it through. When I walked into the house, the air felt wrong. Too bright. Too tight. My mother was at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce with unnecessary force. My sister sat at the table, arms crossed, lips pressed into a pout I recognized from childhood. My brother hovered near the fridge, pretending to look for something. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence," my mother said without turning around. "Miss Independent." I swallowed. "Hi, Mom." We ate in strange, brittle silence for a few minutes. Finally, my mother put down her fork. "So," she said, "tell your brother and sister what you told me." I stared at her. "I told you I can't co-sign another loan," I said carefully. "I've taken on as much as I can. I need to focus on my own finances now." My sister scoffed. "Wow," she said. "Seriously? After everything Mom has done for you?" My brother shook his head slowly. "I knew this was coming," he muttered. "Ever since she moved out, it's like she thinks she's better than us." "Better than you," I repeated, heat rising in my face. "I've been helping you both for years. Rent, books, bills. Half the time I'm the only one actually paying on time." My mother's eyes flashed. Listen to yourself, she said. Like you're some kind of martyr. Nobody forced you to help. You chose to. And now you want credit. You want us to bow down and thank you. I want you to stop treating me like a walking credit card. I snapped before I could stop myself. I want you to respect that I have limits. The room went very quiet. I could hear the fridge humming. My mother leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. Her voice was calm when she spoke, almost gentle. You know what I think, she said. I think you've forgotten where you came from. I think all that money you make has gone to your head. Real family doesn't say no when there's a need. I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. Real family doesn't use one child as a backup plan, I said. Real family doesn't guilt trip you for not signing your name on debts you didn't create. My mother's face hardened. You're selfish, she said, the word dropping heavy between us. After everything I've sacrificed, after all the nights I stayed up worrying about you, this is the thanks I get. I felt something inside me shrink. But at the same time, another part of me, the part that had been slowly waking up, stood a little taller. I'm not selfish for wanting a life of my own, I said quietly. I'm not selfish for not wanting to be in debt for the rest of my life, because other people refuse to grow up. For a second, no one moved. Then my sister pushed her chair back with a screech. She looked at me like I was something she'd stepped in. You know what, she said. I'm done. I'm so done with your drama, with your victim stories. Mom, you don't need this. She jabbed a finger in my direction. You're dead to this family. There it was. The sentence that would echo in my head every time I thought about calling them, every time I hovered over the block button, every time I saw a family in a restaurant and imagined what it would be like to be loved without conditions. You're dead to this family. I didn't know it then, but in that moment, sitting at my mother's table with half-eaten food congealing on our plates, they weren't just cutting me off emotionally. They were already making plans for a future where my name wouldn't be on anything, except, of course, the debts I'd already agreed to carry. If the wedding was a slap, the days afterward were the slow, throbbing ache that made it hard to breathe. I wish I could say I turned my phone off and moved on with my life, but that would be a lie. I hate liars now, including the ones I've been to myself. The truth is, I kept looking. I kept scrolling through photos of people who didn't want me there, trying to figure out why I couldn't stop staring at lives that had been built like a house on top of my back. A week after the wedding, my cousin posted a picture of my sister and her new husband standing in front of a little brick house with white trim and a rose bush by the steps. The caption said, "First home together. God is good." I opened the photo and my stomach clenched. I knew that house. Not because I'd ever been in it, but because I recognized the style, the street, the exact slant of the driveway. It was 2 blocks from the house my father used to drive past and point at, saying, "Something like that for you one day, baby. Solid foundation. Not fancy, but yours." He always said it that way, yours. Not for you and your husband. Not for the family. For me. As if he could already see, somehow, the life I was building without anyone's help but my own and his quiet, everyday belief in me. I zoomed in on the picture. The new welcome mat, the freshly painted door, the kind of renovations that didn't just appear overnight. My sister leaned into her husband, her hand resting possessively on his chest, a shiny key between her fingers like a prop in a commercial. I knew what she made at her job. I knew what he made too, because everyone in that town knew everyone's business. On their combined salaries with their habits, that house, especially in this market, didn't add up. The same way the venue didn't add up, or the live band, or the lace dress with the kind of detailing that doesn't come off the budget rack. The more I looked, the stranger it felt, like one of those pictures where you're supposed to spot the differences and suddenly realize the chair in the background is floating. Everything looked normal at first glance, but underneath, there was a wrongness humming like a fluorescent light about to blow. I tried to push it down. I told myself it wasn't my business anymore. They had made that very clear. but the feeling stayed. It sat in my chest, heavy and sharp and restless. The answer didn't come from a Facebook post or an Instagram story. It came, like so many ugly truths in my family, from a careless mouth that forgot I still had ears. It happened in the canned goods aisle of the grocery store. I was staring at two different brands of soup, trying to decide which one I could justify based on the week's budget, when I heard my name in a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Is that you, baby? Lord, you look just like your daddy." I turned and saw Aunt Laverne leaning on her cart, eyes wide, lips already pursed in that way she had when she was preparing to deliver either a blessing or a curse. With her, it was always 50-50. I forced a smile. "Hi, Auntie, it's been a while." She pulled me into a hug that smelled like floral perfume and fried chicken. "You don't call nobody," she scolded lightly. "We thought you moved to Alaska or something. Your mama said you didn't want anything more to do with the family after all she did for you." There it was, the first little crack in the story. "Is that what she said?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "That I didn't want anything to do with you all?" "Well," Laverne shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. "She said you'd gone your own way, got yourself above your raising," is how she put it. Above your raising. I'd heard the phrase whispered about other people before, never at me. It stung in a way that had nothing to do with money. "I see," I said. "I didn't know I was that powerful, to just decide a whole family doesn't exist." She shook her head like she wanted to take it back, then leaned in closer, dropping her voice. "All I know is, your daddy would be spinning in his grave if he knew what your mama did with that money," she said. "But that's between y'all. I keep my mouth shut." The world seemed to tilt. "What money?" I asked. My throat felt dry. "What are you talking about?" She frowned. "You mean to tell me she did?" Then her eyes widened, and I saw the moment she realized she'd said too much. "I didn't say anything," she muttered, backing up. "You know how folks talk, I don't know the details." "Aunt Laverne," my voice came out sharper than I intended. "What money?" She chewed the inside of her cheek, then sighed. "Your daddy came to see me a few months before he passed," she said. "He was worried sick about what would happen to y'all, especially you. He told me he made sure you'd be taken care of. Said, 'I put the house and most of what we saved in her name. She gave up half her life for us. She deserves some security.'" My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "He said that," I whispered. "More than once," she said. "He was proud of you, always bragging, 'My oldest, she's steady as a rock. She'll build something out of all this mess.'" She glanced around, like the shelves had eyes. "Then after he passed, your mama told everyone you threw a fit about the will. Said you wanted more than your fair share. Said you were calling lawyers and causing trouble." I laughed then, a short, disbelieving sound. "I didn't even see the will," I said. "I signed whatever she put in front of me. She told me there was nothing left by the time the bank and the hospital were done." Laverne's mouth dropped open. "Well, that's funny," she said slowly, "because your cousin works at the courthouse, and she mentioned in passing that there was some drama. Your mama went in twice. Once with your daddy, then again after he died. But you didn't hear that from me." My hands were shaking now. I leaned on my cart to steady myself. "She changed it," I said, more to myself than to her. "She changed something." "Baby, I don't know." Laverne held up her hands. "All I know is, if your daddy could see your sister in that big all house and you in this cheap-ass store looking tired, well, he'd be spinning in his grave. That's all I'm gonna say." I must have made some kind of face, because she patted my arm awkwardly. "Don't go starting a war now," she added. "You know your mama. She'll turn it all back on you, she always does." But the war had already started, and I was the only one who didn't know I was in it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, old school style, because something about this felt bigger than a note app and a few screenshots. I drew a line down the middle of the page and wrote on one side, "What Dad said." On the other, "What Mom did." I wrote house in my name, most savings in my name, security. And on the other side, there was nothing left. We barely covered the funeral. "You should be grateful we have a roof at all." Memories came back in flashes. My father's hand on mine at the hospital, his voice weak but clear. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself when I'm gone. Don't let them use you up." The way he'd squeezed my fingers on the word them. Who was them? At the time, I thought he meant the world in general. Bosses, bills, bad men. Now, sitting there with my cheap pen and my cheap instant coffee, I realized he might have meant the people in the next room watching TV with the volume too loud. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, on my lunch break, I called the lawyer's office that had handled my father's paperwork. The name came back to me in a rush: Kaplan and Sons, small plaque, second floor of the old brick building near the courthouse. The receptionist sounded bored until I mentioned my father's full name. Then there was a pause, and I heard the click-clack of keys. "Yes, we have a file under that name," she said. "But I'm afraid I can't just discuss details. You'd have to make an appointment." "I'm his daughter," I said. "I just want to understand what happened with his will." Another pause. "I can't promise anything," she said, lowering her voice like someone might be listening. "But if you come in with identification, Mr. Kaplan can explain what he's allowed to share." I made the appointment for the earliest possible time. Walking into that office felt like stepping back into a version of my life where I still believed in adults who told you the truth. The reception area was small, lined with dark wood and diplomas. It smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Mr. Kaplan looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were the same, kind, tired, a little wary. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said after we sat down. "Your father was a good man. We worked together for many years." "He thought so too," I said before I could stop myself. My voice came out brittle. He studied me for a moment. "What can I help you with, MS?" He glanced down at the file. "Ms. Taylor." "I just found out that my father planned to leave certain things to me," I said. "The house, some savings. My aunt says he talked about it. But after he died, my mother told me there was nothing left. No assets. No will to fight over. I signed what she put in front of me. Now my sister has a new house and a fairy tale wedding, and I'm realizing something doesn't make sense." I stopped talking and listened to my own words hang in the air. They sounded crazy and painfully sane at the same time. Mr. Kaplan sighed, took off his glasses, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "I have to be careful here," he said. "Client confidentiality extends beyond death in certain ways. Your mother was the executor, but you are a named beneficiary, and there were developments." He opened the file, flipping through pages that rustled like dry leaves. "Your father did, in fact, write an original will," he said slowly, "about a year before he passed. In it, he left the marital home and the bulk of his liquid assets to you, with smaller bequests to your siblings and provisions for your mother." My heart hammered against my ribs. "So I wasn't crazy," I whispered. "He did say that." "The language was clear," Kaplan said. "He said, and I remember this because it stood out, that you had sacrificed your youth and opportunity to serve as caregiver and provider, and he wanted to ensure you had a stable foundation." I swallowed hard. Tears pricked my eyes, but anger burned hotter. "What happened?" I asked, "because that's not what my mother told me." "After his death," Kaplan continued carefully, "your mother came in to discuss his estate. There were some debts, yes, but not enough to eliminate everything. There was equity in the house. There were savings. She expressed concern about family conflict. She said you had reacted badly to being informed of the will's contents." I stared at him. "Reacted badly?" "She said you accused her of trying to cheat you, that you were threatening to tear the family apart if you didn't get everything you believed you deserved." He glanced up. "I'm just telling you what she said." I laughed again, that same hollow sound that had started in the grocery store. "I never saw the will," I said. "I didn't even know I was supposed to. She told me there was nothing, that the bank took it all. The only thing I reacted to was being asked to pay for everything after." His mouth tightened. "A few weeks after that meeting," he went on, "your mother returned with a different attorney. They had drafted a new document, perfectly legal but ethically murky, in my opinion. It restructured certain assets. She sold a piece of property your father owned separately, cashed out some investments, and combined the proceeds into accounts under her sole control. The house was refinanced. Some of the equity was withdrawn. In other words, I said, my voice shaking, she found a way to get her hands on the money he meant for me. In effect, he said quietly, yes, you were still listed to receive a small amount, but after debts and fees, it was negligible. By the time you signed the final documents, there was very little left in your name. I sat there, dizzy with rage. The room seemed to tilt again, but this time I grabbed the edge of the chair and held on. Why didn't anyone call me? I asked. Why didn't you tell me what my father wanted? I sent letters to the address on file, he said. 2 of them. Your mother responded on your behalf, said you were too emotional to handle the details and that you trusted her to do what was best. Too emotional. As if I was some wild animal that couldn't be shown a piece of paper without attacking it. I would never have said that, I whispered. I believe you, he said. Unfortunately, by the time I realized something was wrong, she had already moved everything and brought in her own counsel. I couldn't legally intervene without a challenge from a beneficiary, and no one challenged. Because no one told me I had anything to challenge. He slid a photocopy of the original across the desk. You have a right to a copy, he said. What you choose to do with this is up to you, just be prepared. Families don't like their ghosts coming back with receipts. I took the pages with hands that didn't feel like they belonged to me. My father's handwriting in the margins, his initials, his careful signature. Seeing them felt like being punched and hugged at the same time. On the way home, I parked 3 blocks from my apartment because my vision kept blurring. I sat in the car and read the will line by line until the paper shook. He had tried. He had really tried to protect me. And my mother had buried his attempt right alongside him. That week, I started seeing things differently. Not just the glossy posts and the filtered joy, but the little details around them. In one picture, my sister stood in the kitchen of her new home, behind a granite countertop that looked very familiar. The pendant lights, the cabinet color. I realized then that the renovation loan I'd been asked to co-sign for years ago had never gone into fixing my mother's leaky roof or outdated bathroom. It had bought upgrades my sister now enjoyed in a house my father meant for me. I went through old boxes in my closet, the ones I'd rescued from my parents' garage when they said they were getting rid of clutter. In the bottom of one, under my high school yearbooks and some outdated tax forms, I found a crumpled folder that smelled faintly of smoke. Inside were half-burned documents, pages with blackened edges, bank statements, loan papers, a printout of an email from the bank about a home equity line of credit with my name on it as a co-signer. Someone had tried to destroy them and gotten lazy or distracted. I smoothed the charred corners with my fingers, a cold calm settling over me. My mother hadn't just twisted the story. She rewritten it completely and then tried to set the evidence on fire. The more I dug, the more I found. Texts from relatives years earlier that I'd ignored at the time. Hey, are you okay? Your mom said you blew up over the will. Your mama told us you threatened to sue her. Please don't do that to her in her grief. She's been through enough. She's real hurt you called her a thief, girl. I had never sent those threats. I had never used those words. But she had, in my name, into ears that were already primed to see me as the difficult one. It was like realizing someone had been drawing horns on your yearbook photo for years and passing it around. The final straw came when another cousin, one I still trusted a little, sent me a screenshot late one night. I thought you should see this, she wrote. It was a group chat I'd been removed from long ago. My mother's messages, captured in neat green bubbles. I don't know what to do with her anymore. She's obsessed with money. It's never enough. Your uncle and I bent over backwards for her, and now she's trying to take food out of your sister's mouth. If she wants to be alone so bad, let her. People like that always end up miserable. People like that. Greedy, unstable, ungrateful. The caricature she had drawn of me was so far from the girl who sold her car to pay for her father's medications that it might as well have been a different species. Something inside me shifted, a slow, grinding movement, like plates under the earth. Up until that point, I think some part of me had still been trying to win, to prove I wasn't who she said I was, to get back into the circle, the way a child hovers outside a closed door, hoping someone will remember they belong inside. But reading those messages, holding my father's original will in my hands, I realized there was no circle to go back to. They had replaced me with a story. I could either keep trying to argue with it, or I could tell my own. Still, I couldn't move forward without one more thing, saying the truth out loud, in the same room where she'd rewritten it. So I called my brother. "Can you be at Mom's on Sunday?" I asked. He hesitated. "She's not going to like that." "She doesn't have to like it," I said. "She just has to be there, you both do." He sighed. "Why are you doing this? Why can't you just let it go?" Because it was never about just one loan, one house, one wedding. Because it was about my father's last attempt to do right by me being treated like a suggestion instead of a promise. "I'll explain Sunday," I said. "If you care about the truth at all, you'll come." Sunday afternoon, I walked up the front steps of the house that should have been mine on paper, and in a different version of reality, maybe in practice too. The paint was peeling a little more. The flower beds needed weeding. But it was still the same place where I'd bandaged scraped knees and cried over teenage heartbreaks and made 100 dinners no one remembered. My mother opened the door with that pinched look she got when she smelled drama. "Oh," she said, "you." Behind her, my sister rested against the kitchen counter, arms folded, nails freshly done. My brother sat at the table, scrolling on his phone like he wanted to be anywhere else. "This better be good," my sister muttered. I stepped inside, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. For a moment, I wanted to turn around and walk back out. But then I felt the folded papers in my bag, the weight of my father's signature, and steadied myself. "I won't take much of your time," I said. "I just need to clear something up. Then I'll get out of your way like you all clearly prefer." My mother's mouth twisted. "Nobody asked you to come stirring the pot," she said. "You've done enough of that for a lifetime." I opened my bag, took out the photocopy of the original will, and laid it on the table. "Did Dad intend to leave this house and most of his savings to me?" I asked, eyes on her face. She glanced down, then back up too quickly. "I don't know what that is," she said. "It's his will," I replied. "The first one, the one you didn't show me, the one you changed after he died." "Oh, for God's sake," she snapped. "You're still on this, after all this time. That lawyer always was messy. He shouldn't be showing you anything." "So it's real," I said quietly. She faltered, then lifted her chin. "Your father was confused at the end," she said. "He wasn't in his right mind. He wrote down all kinds of nonsense. He didn't mean to cut your brother and sister out. I fixed it, like I always fix things in this family." My sister scoffed. "So what, you came here to cry that you didn't get the big piece of chicken," she said. "You're unbelievable." I ignored her and kept my eyes on my mother. "Dad came to Aunt Laverne and told her specifically he wanted me to have security," I said. "He knew I'd sacrificed for this family. He tried to make sure I didn't spend the rest of my life paying for everyone else's choices. And instead of honoring that, you told everyone I was throwing tantrums about money I didn't even know existed. You sold property, you refinanced the house, you moved everything into your name, and you made me the villain." My voice was shaking now, but I didn't care. Let it shake. Let them hear how hard it was to say these words after years of swallowing them. "Watch your tone," my mother hissed. "You don't come into my house and talk to me like I'm some kind of criminal." "If the shoe fits," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "You have always wanted more than your share," she said, each word clipped. "From the time you were little, always reaching, always grabbing. We fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head, and you act like we owe you the world." "You used me," I shot back. "You used my time, my money, my energy. You took the future Dad tried to give me and handed it to someone else. then told everybody I was the greedy one. My brother finally looked up from his phone. "Come on," he said. "You're making it sound like you were some kind of slave. You helped. So what? That's what families do. This obsession with who gets what, it's ugly." Ugly? That was rich, coming from a man who hadn't met a bill he liked enough to pay on time. "This isn't about a house," I said. "It's about lies. It's about being erased. I watched my sister get married at a venue Dad and I used to talk about like a dream. She has a new house. She has the life he promised me while I was working double shifts to keep this place from falling apart. All I want is for you to admit what you did." My mother laughed then. Actually laughed. It was a cold, brittle sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You want me to say what?" she said. "That I stole from you, that I'm some kind of monster, that your poor, sainted father only loved you." "I want you to say the truth," I replied. "He left these things in my name. You changed it. You told people I was unstable and money-hungry to justify it." She shook her head slowly, like I was a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "You always did have a flair for drama," she said. "Your father would be ashamed of you right now. Going around, dragging our name in the mud, waving papers around like a lawyer on TV. You think anybody's going to side with you, after everything you've said and done?" My sister leaned forward, eyes hard. "You abandoned us," she said. "You walked out when things got tough. Mom did what she had to do. If Dad had really wanted to give you everything, he would have made sure nobody could change it. Maybe deep down he knew better." It was such a twisting of reality that for a second, I felt dizzy. I thought of my father signing those papers with his shaky hand, trusting the woman he'd loved for decades to carry out his wishes. He had believed, the way I once had, that love and honesty were the same thing. "I didn't abandon you," I said quietly. "You told me I was dead to this family." My sister rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, you know I was just mad." "Maybe you were," I said, "but you meant it, and so did she when she cut my name out of everything that mattered." I turned back to my mother. "I'm not here to beg for scraps," I said. "I'm not here to ask you to fix it. I know you won't. I know you'll twist this story no matter what happens. I'm here because I needed you to see that I know what you did. I know who you told people I am. And I'm done carrying the shame for choices I didn't make." Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. "You think you're better than us now," she hissed. "With your little apartment and your little job, you think a few pieces of paper make you somebody." "No," I said. "I think the way I lived makes me somebody. I think the fact that I didn't sell out my own child's future to keep up appearances makes me somebody. I think the way Dad trusted me says more about who I am than any story you've told to protect yourself." We stared at each other across the table, the woman who gave me life and the woman she refused to see I had become. My brother shifted uncomfortably. My sister picked at her nail polish. "I want you out of my house," my mother said finally, her voice low and shaking. "And don't you dare come back crying when you realize nobody believes you. You want to be alone so bad. Fine, go be alone." I nodded. It hurt, of course it hurt. It felt like having my skin peeled back in strips, but somewhere underneath the pain, there was a thin, surprising vein of relief. "I've been alone for a long time," I said. "The only difference now is that I'm done pretending I'm not." I picked up my father's will, folding it carefully, like something precious and fragile. I slid it back into my bag and stood up. At the doorway, I paused and turned back, taking one last look at the kitchen where I'd washed so many dishes, cooked so many meals, listened to so many complaints that were never mine. "You always said family remembers who really shows up," I told my mother. "I hope one day you realize I was the only one who actually did." Then I walked out before they could see the tears in my eyes. On the ride home, my phone buzzed with a single text from my brother. "You really messed things up today," it read. "You could have just let it go." I stared at his words for a long time before typing back, then deleting, then typing again. Finally, I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove in silence. Because in that moment, with my father's wishes folded in my bag and my mother's denial still ringing in my ears, I realized something. They were never going to give me the truth. They were never going to give me justice. They were never going to give me love that didn't come with an invoice. If I wanted any of those things, I would have to stop asking them for permission. And that was the first quiet, shaking moment when I understood. I might have lost my family that day, but I had finally stopped losing myself. I thought the confrontation at my mother's house would feel like a finale. It didn't. It felt like walking out of a burning building and realizing the fire was still inside you. I drove home with my hands locked on the steering wheel, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. My father's will have folded weight in my bag like proof that I hadn't imagined the last 10 years of my life. For a couple of days, I did nothing. I went to work, I answered emails, I bought groceries, I smiled when people said, "How are you?" and said, "I'm fine," like I hadn't just been declared an enemy by the people whose approval I once measured my whole worth by. But every time I opened the cabinet and saw the cheap dishes I'd bought instead of the ones I really wanted, every time I sat at my second-hand table and thought about the house my father had tried to put in my name, something twisted inside me. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was fury. Slow, steady, sober fury. I realized there were two voices in my head. One was the familiar daughter voice. Maybe this is your fault. Maybe you're overreacting. If you just apologize, again, maybe they'll calm down and you'll be allowed to come back, even if it's only as a shadow in the corner. The other voice was new, quieter but more solid. It said, they lied, they used you, they erased you. You are not crazy for wanting that to mean something. That second voice was the one that opened my laptop, searched a state litigation attorney near me, and sent 3 tentative emails asking for consultations. The first lawyer I met with was a man with slick hair and a watch that cost more than my car. He skimmed the photocopy of my father's will, the later documents, and the half-burned papers I dug out of the box. He kept checking his phone while I talked. "Messy," he said finally. "Very messy, but you're years out from the date of death and any major transfers. Statute of limitations is going to be an issue. Challenging this would be difficult and expensive." "Does difficult mean impossible?" I asked. "It means," he said, smiling in that way professionals do when they're softening a blow, "you have to decide what your end goal is. If you're looking for emotional closure, court won't give you that. If you're looking for money, well, there may not be much left to recover." I walked out of his office feeling small, like I'd broken some unspoken rule by even considering fighting back. The second lawyer was a woman around my age with tired eyes and a stack of files on her desk. She listened without interrupting, took notes, and asked detailed questions about dates, conversations, and amounts. After an hour, she leaned back and said, "This is ugly, and no, it's not a slam-dunk case, but from what I see, there are at least potential claims: undue influence, breach of fiduciary duty as executor, maybe more depending on what we find in the records." "So I'm not crazy?" I asked. The question came out raw, childish. She met my eyes. "No," she said. "You're not crazy. You're someone whose father tried to protect them and whose mother appears to have taken certain liberties. I can't tell you what to do, but you do have options." Options sounded like oxygen. She slid a sheet of paper across the desk. "My retainer fee is here," she said. "I wish I could tell you this will be quick and clean. It won't. It will take time. It will stir things up. It might not give you the storybook justice you want, but it could, at minimum, force some truths onto the record." Force some truths onto the record. I thought about my mother's face when I laid the will on the table. The way she'd laughed, like I was a child playing courtroom. The way my siblings had looked at me like I was a stranger crashing their dinner. I thought about my father's handwriting in the margins. I thought about myself, on that gray couch, watching a wedding paid for with money that was supposed to keep me safe. "I don't want to become her," I said quietly. "I don't want to turn into someone who lives for revenge and ruins everyone's life to win." "Good," the lawyer said. "Then you won't. The law can't make them love you. It can't make them decent. It can only draw a line between what was supposed to happen and what actually did. You have to decide if that line is worth drawing, even if it costs you. We sat in silence for a moment. Will I win? I asked. She gave a small, honest shrug. Maybe, maybe not, but right now they're winning by default. They've told their version. You haven't told yours in any official way. That's the only guarantee. If you do nothing, nothing changes. In the end, I signed. Not because I was sure I would win, but because I was tired of living like I had already lost. The next months weren't dramatic. There were no shouting matches in court hallways, no dramatic confessions on the witness stand. Real life rarely looks like the shows we watch. Instead, there were documents, so many documents. Bank statements, property records, email threads, paper trails that showed how money had moved out of accounts that once had my name attached and into accounts where it magically disappeared under the label of household expenses. There were letters sent by my new lawyer to my mother's lawyer, and letters sent back that insisted everything had been done correctly and with the full knowledge and consent of all parties. There were nights when I sat on my couch with a highlighter, circling dates and amounts until the numbers blurred, wondering if I was actually building a case or just obsessing myself into exhaustion. And there were the calls. My mother didn't call at first. She was too proud or too angry or both, but other people did. My brother, why are you dragging us through court? You're going to make Mom sick, you know that. My sister, God, you're unbelievable. After everything she's done for you, you're trying to take the roof over her head. You're disgusting. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions. Sweetie, is this really necessary? Your mother is old, you know. She won't be here forever. Let God handle it. Lawsuits just bring more curse. For every message that tried to guilt me into dropping everything, I opened a notebook and wrote it down. Date, time, what was said, how it made me feel. Not because I planned to use it in court, but because I needed a record, for me, of what this fight cost and what it revealed. I started seeing a therapist, too. A woman with kind eyes who let me ramble about loans and wills and burner folders, then gently steered me back to the real wound. The girl who had spent a lifetime begging for crumbs and calling it love. You keep talking about justice, she said once, but what you really sound hungry for is acknowledgement. To hear, we did you wrong. Yes, I said, my voice cracking. I want someone to say it wasn't just in my head. What if the person who needs to say that is you? She asked. I hated that question. I hated it because I knew she was right. Parallel to the legal process, I started building small new rituals. Nothing big. I didn't suddenly move to a beach town or quit my job to become an artist. I did things like buy a new set of dishes, cheap, but chosen because I liked them, not because they were on sale. Cook a nice meal for myself on Sunday evenings. Instead of scrolling through pictures of family gatherings I wasn't invited to. Say no, without explaining myself in 3 paragraphs. The first time my mother finally called, it was 11:47 p.m. I was already in bed. The old me would have answered on the first ring, heart racing, rehearsing apologies. Instead, I stared at the phone lighting up on the nightstand. I let it ring out. A minute later, a text came. So this is who you are now. A daughter who sues her own mother and can't even pick up the phone. My fingers itched to reply, to defend myself, to send screenshots of the will, the bank statements, the messages where she'd painted me as a thief. Instead, I turned the phone face down and went back to sleep. The next morning, I forwarded the text to my email and saved it in a folder labeled Evidence Emotional. Not for court, for my own memory. Boundaries started small like that. I told my brother, I will not discuss the lawsuit over the phone. If you have something to say about it, have your lawyer say it to mine. I told my sister, if you call me names, I'm hanging up. If you send me abusive texts, I'm blocking the number. When they tested those boundaries, and they did over and over, I followed through. I hung up. I blocked. I cried afterward, but I didn't undo it. Some nights, the daughter in me would panic. What if this is all a mistake? What if I am the selfish one? What if I'm burning the last bridge back home? But the woman in me, the one who'd signed the retainer and bought herself a decent coat without asking permission, would answer. Home is not where you are allowed to be hurt, and then told you're crazy for bleeding. Months turned into over a year. The case crawled along. There were delays, hearings rescheduled. My lawyer told me, this is normal, and I tried to believe her. Finally, there was a mediation. One of those long days where you sit in a windowless room while negotiators go back and forth between you and the other side like divorced parents trying to get kids to split a toy. My mother didn't look at me when we arrived. She sat with her lawyer, lips tight, wearing the pearl earrings I'd given her years before. I stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at her profile, feeling that old ache tug at me, the part of me that still wanted her to turn and say, I'm sorry, I did this wrong, come home. She didn't. We spent 8 hours there. Numbers were discussed. Terms. There was talk of no admission of wrongdoing, of avoiding the emotional toll of a trial. At one point, my lawyer shut the door and looked at me. They're offering a settlement, she said. She named a figure. It wasn't what I thought my father had intended for me. It wasn't nothing either. If we go to trial, you might get more, you might get less, you might get nothing. You have to decide if this is about being right or about being as whole as you can be and walking away. I stared at the table. What would you do? I asked. She smiled faintly. I'm not you, she said, but I'd ask myself which version of this story lets me sleep at night. In the end, I accepted a settlement. Not because it erased what had been done, or because it somehow magically made everything fair. It didn't. No amount of money can fix the kind of wound that comes from realizing your own mother chose her comfort over your future. I accepted because I realized my idea of winning had shifted. Winning wasn't dragging her onto a stand and making a judge declare her a villain in front of the world. Winning was getting a legal acknowledgement that there had been something worth fighting for, and then choosing not to let that fight be the only story I told about myself. The judge signed off on the agreement in a brief, almost boring hearing. He glanced at the file, at the signatures, at the stack of documents we'd collected. Looks like a complicated situation, he said, a little wearily. I'm glad you all were able to reach a resolution. It was a simple sentence, but to me, standing there with my hands clasped to stop them from shaking, it felt like the first neutral person in authority had quietly admitted, yes, this mattered. You weren't imagining it. That was one layer of vindication. Another came months later, in the produce section of the same grocery store, where Aunt Laverne had spilled the first secret. A woman I barely recognized at first, one of my mother's cousins, approached me, clutching a bag of oranges. I'm not taking sides, she said abruptly, before I could even say hello. I don't want no drama, but I just wanted you to know. We always wondered why you weren't at the wedding. Your mama told us you didn't want to come, that you thought you were too good for us. I laughed softly, not bitter this time, just tired. Of course she did, I said. The cousin shifted, then lowered her voice. Then that paperwork came out, she said. Folks started talking. Some of us, we put 2 and 2 together. We knew you weren't crazy. We just didn't know how to say it without starting a war. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a full confession. But it was another tiny crack in the wall my mother had built between me and the rest of the family. I appreciate you telling me, I said, even if it's late. She nodded. Sometimes late is all we got, she said. Just take care of yourself, okay? Nobody else is going to do it for you. She was right. Somewhere along the way, without fanfare, I started building a life that didn't revolve around watching my family from a distance and trying to decode their cruelty. I made friends, not just coworkers or acquaintances, but actual friends who checked on me when I was quiet and remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding them. I started hosting small dinners in my apartment, seating people around that new table I'd bought, feeding them recipes I'd learned in the kitchen where my own needs never seemed to fit. I found a little community group that met on Thursdays to talk about boundaries and burnout and healing from difficult families. The first few times, I sat in the back, arms crossed, thinking I didn't belong. Then one night, a woman in her 50s said, "I'm just so tired of begging people to love me while they're standing on my neck," and something in me cracked open. I cried in front of strangers who passed me tissues without asking for the full story. On the anniversary of my father's death, instead of going to my mother's house to be ignored in a corner while she talked about how strong she was, I drove to the cemetery alone. I brought him coffee from his favorite place. I sat on the grass and told him everything. How his will had been changed, how I'd found out, how I'd fought not just in court but inside my own head to believe I was worth the fight. "I'm not rich, Dad," I said, wiping my nose. "Not the way you wanted me to be, not yet. But I'm not broke in the same way anymore either. I'm not letting them spend my life like it's small change." The wind picked up, rustling the trees. A cliché, maybe, but in that moment it felt like an answer. Over time, the wedding photos stopped hurting in the same way. Not because what happened was okay. It wasn't. But because they became less central in the movie reel playing in my mind. They were one scene, a loud one, but not the whole story. These days, when I think of weddings, I don't picture my sister walking down that aisle without me. I picture the small ceremony my friend had in her backyard, where she asked me to stand next to her and say a blessing because she said, "You know something about surviving." I picture the way, on a random Tuesday, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, looked myself in the eye and said, "I choose you," like a vow. I'm not naive. There are still days when the old ache rises. When I see a mother and daughter laughing together in a store and feel that sharp, familiar sting of envy and grief. There are still nights when the little girl in me wonders if maybe, just maybe, there was something I could have done to make my mother choose me instead of her image. But now, there's something else too. There's the knowledge that I chose me. Not perfectly, not without fear or mess or second guessing, but I did. I didn't get my seat back at their table. I stopped asking for it. Instead, I dragged a cheap, wobbly table into this small apartment, sanded it down, painted it, and set it with the dishes I chose. I invited people into my life who actually see me, not the version of me that makes them feel better about themselves. I wasn't at that wedding. But one quiet evening, with candles lit and laughter bouncing off these thin walls, I realized I had walked myself down a different kind of aisle. The distance between who I was when I sat on that gray couch refreshing Instagram and who I am now, telling this story with my own voice. I didn't get the life my father tried to hand me on paper. I got something else. I got the chance to stop being the invisible servant at everyone else's feast and finally become the woman who decides what goes on her own plate. And as strange as it sounds, I think, in his own gruff way, he'd be proud of that too. Moral of the story. Some betrayals don't start with a knife in your back. They start with a signature on a document, a favor that shouldn't be a big deal, and a mother who loves her image more than she loves the child who holds everything together. The real freedom isn't getting your seat back at their table. It's realizing you can build a new table in a new house, paid for with your own name and your own peace. Comment prompt. If you were in my place, discovering that your own mother funded a wedding you weren't invited to with money meant for you, what would you do next? Would you confront, walk away, or fight back in court? Support/subscribe invitation. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt like the forgotten one, the provider, the scapegoat, stay with me. Subscribe, share this with a friend who needs to hear it, and let's keep building a community where women stop apologizing for choosing themselves over the people who only loved what they could take.